Shalom, shalom, Chevra. Thank you so much for being here for a very important conversation that our speakers will frame themselves. And suffice it to say that this is just one of the many areas that is crucial for living an ethical life. That is honoring people we care about. That is making clear our own ethical choices
Mm-hmm.
and finding the pathways to be communicative enough that we can convey those wishes and values to others so that we have clarity on what we wish to be done for ourselves and for our family members. And so there are some basics that some of us may not be familiar with, which will be covered, but also a chance to go much deeper. Our presenters are going to take about 40 to 45 minutes to share, followed by about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A, so that we can all feel really comfortable with some of these complex ideas, as well as comfortable with the new resource that has been provided. I'm happy to share that I already used it. I had coffee with my father a few weeks ago and took this new resource that these two rabbis worked on. And I found it incredibly helpful to sit with him and work through that whole resource, actually. I thought it would take 20 minutes, and it took us well over an hour, and we're just getting started. So let me briefly tell you who's here based on what they're doing now and what books they've written. And then my colleague Isaac is going to put in the chat their fuller bio if you want to see some of the other things they've done. Rabbi Dr. Jason Weiner serves as the senior rabbi and executive director of the spiritual care department at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, where he's responsible for the chaplaincy team and all aspects of spiritual care throughout the health system. He's also the rabbi of Knesset Israel Synagogue of Beverlywood. I was recently at that shul just months ago, and it was very Hamish and delightful. He's also written a few books I want to call your attention to that rabbis should know about. One is called Guide to Observance of Jewish Law in a Hospital, published by Kodesh Press. One is Jewish Guide to Practical Medical Decision-Making, published by Urim. And Care and Covenant, a Jewish Bioethic of Responsibility, published by Georgetown University Press. All three very significant and recommended. Then we also have here Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody, who is the executive director of Amitai and the Jewish law columnist for the Jerusalem Post. And two important books, if you haven't picked them up yet. One is A Guide to the Complex, Contemporary Halachic Debates, published by Magid. And one is Ethics of Our Fighters, A Jewish View on War and Morality, which I'm actually currently enjoying in a stack of 20 other books. No offense to that one. There's just a lot of competing interest. But these are two halachists and ethicists, and it's really, we're very honored that they're giving us their time to help support us in thinking through these issues. Thank you, Isaac, for those bios on the side. And with that, this group is mostly rabbis here. I'm now honored to pass it over to Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Brody to lead this conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rav Shmuley. Appreciate it. I think the genesis of this conversation came out of a discussion that we had a few weeks ago. And as we were talking, we sort of realized like everyone should know about this stuff. And we thought like it'd be great to offer it more broadly. And you know, your introduction's so kind. You're always so kind. I mean, personally, I just see myself as a chaplain. And my main focus is, you know, sitting with people, with families and patients, especially at the end of life. And one of the big issues that comes up, you know, nowadays medicine can do so much. It's really incredible, and it's doing more and more, and it's exciting to watch. We can do things that we never could have imagined in the past, and that includes prolonging life, and that's a great blessing. But life isn't always prolonged in a way that maybe is seen as a blessing by everyone who's experiencing it. And it prolongs life also in ways that sometimes people are kept alive, but they cannot speak for themselves. And this has become one of the major challenges in the world of medicine in the last, you know, generation or so, which is that figuring out we have a lot of options. There's so much we can do, and people are alive, but they can't tell us what they would want. They can't describe their goals, their values, their preferences. And so one of the tools that was developed really in the 70s, 80s to respond to that issue was this issue of creating advanced directives to create a document that someone writes while they are alive and well, where they say, if I'm ever in a situation where I can't speak for myself, let me tell you about who I am and what I stand for and what I value and what I don't value and what I would want, especially how I make medical decisions. And that would help people to make the right decision. It ensures that your own values are respected, and it avoids a lot of the stress and guilt. And also, as a chaplain, unfortunately, we see it, and I'm sure as rabbis and care providers, we see a lot of stress at the end of life, and sometimes families even breaking apart, and horrible things that happen because of all of the fighting and the emotional guilt. And we want to mitigate that. Unfortunately, people don't like to talk about the end of life. They don't like talking about death. Shmuel, you mentioned you're reading Shlomo's Rabbi Brody's new book. I've just finished reading an oldie but goodie, Ernst Becker's The Denial of Death. I don't know if any of you ever heard of that book. It's a classic. It's from the 80s, but it's about the psychological reality that people try to avoid thinking about their mortality, and they do all kinds of psychological, tricks to keep themselves from focusing on those issues. And we think we're going to live forever, but sadly, and I wish you all very long lives, but life is limited, and that's reality. So we have to think about these things. And I know even from a Jewish perspective, sometimes people will say like, well, it's an ayin hara. I don't want to talk about it because it's a bad omen. It's bad luck. But the reality is that there is a tradition that, you might have heard this, that if you purchase your burial plot while you're alive and well, it's a segula for richas yamim. It's a segula, a charm for long life. Now, I'm sitting here in a hospital. I don't think any of the researchers here, if I told them about that, they say, let's do a double blind, study on this, and let's see if people who have their burial plots actually live longer. And I'm not going to put much stock in that they will live longer, but I don't think that's what it actually means. There's a great story, and don't worry, my spiel's almost over. There's a great story about the Sfas Emes. He died in his 50s. And the story goes that when his sons were sitting Shiva, someone came in to be Menachem Avel, and they said to one of his sons, at least, actually, I should pause. One of the, I think there was once a video like what not to say when visiting the sick, or what not to say when being Menachem Avel. No sentence should begin with, well, at least, right? But anyways, these people said, well, at least he had a Richas Yamim. So his son was like, what are you talking about? He died in his 50s. I don't know if you know, but he was very young. So this person said, no. I didn't say he had a richas shanim. I said he had a richas yamim. He made the most of every day that he had. And I think there is something to be said for the fact that this segula is a segula for richas yamim. When you recognize the mortality, when you recognize the fragility of life, when we recognize I only have so many years to live, I need to accomplish, I need to do it now because I don't have unlimited time on this earth. It actually makes you live life better. And that's why, I'm so glad to hear, Shmuel, that you sat with your father and filled out this form. It's meant to also, enhance relationships and make us really think about things that we should be thinking about. So, as I mentioned, there was this push to have advanced directives. There's different types of advanced directives. One is just called, like a proxy or a durable power of attorney. That is where you simply appoint. It's just I'm appointing who would speak for me if I can't speak for myself. That's all it is. That's one method. That has its benefits, which is that it's simple and it really reduces the barriers to filling it out. It's like, okay, it's simple. I just appoint someone. But first of all, you could have rabbis. I don't know about you. I myself, maybe it's because I work in a hospital, I've gotten calls before where I've been told, Rabbi, so and so is on a ventilator, and he listed you as his rabbi, and what would he want? And honestly, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Who is he? Who is that? Who is it? I don't know who it is. I met them 15 years ago and I forgot. So it's like it's a little bit challenging when you list someone, or it could be, let's say you list a family member, which is the most common. And of course, hopefully they do know who you are, but they still might not have ever talked to you about what would you want in these scenarios? And they're stuck because there's a lot of options. So that's the proxy. So to avoid that, a number of organizations created what they call advanced directives or living wills. Living will is where you actually fill out and you have a questionnaire. I would want this. I wouldn't want that. I would want dialysis. I wouldn't want artificial feeding. I wouldn't want to be, you go through the whole list. The problem with that is that first of all, let's say I filled mine out already 10 years ago. So I can't predict what I'm gonna like. Hopefully, God willing, I won't need it for 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever. I don't want to put a number on it. The technology is changing rapidly, and also I don't even know what illness I'll be struggling with. Like why I'll be there. How can I really decide now what I would want then? So it was difficult to just have this list. So what happened in the Orthodox community, and this is important now, this gets us directly to Netivot, and I'll turn it over to Rabbi Brody. What happened in the Orthodox community was there were two forms. The RCA had a form that Rabbi Tendler created, which explicitly accepted brain death and therefore gave options of organ donation and listed a number of options that maybe some poskim wouldn't have allowed, but he felt that everything on that document was allowed. And then there was the Aguda form. The Aguda, and I'm mentioning these not to detract from any of them, God forbid, I'm just mentioning the history of the development of the advanced directive. The Aguda said, you know what, don't list what you don't want because it's too dangerous. You're going to list something that we think is against halacha. Just put only your proxy, your family member, whoever that is, and your rabbi. And if your rabbi is not available, it'll go to our Beis Din, and we'll decide, and that's it. Leave it at that. The RCA then, partially because of the controversies around brain death, said, you know what, their form is better. And I'm not saying this to say anything against the RCA. They told me this specifically. This was decision making. They said, first of all, brain death is controversial. We don't want to explicitly accept it. Number two, they had a point there, the Aguda, in just leaving it simple as just point a proxy, point your rabbi. So the RCA said, we're just going to copy the Aguda form. And that was it. What I found out in my work in the hospital is that many rabbis were not finding that to be sufficient because they need to know details about who this person is, what they stand for. So they would add to it what we call in legalese a writer. A writer is where you just describe, who am I? What are my values? What are my goals? What are my preferences? What we decided to do first at Cedar Sinai and then Amitai, which Rabbi Brody is the executive director of, he really, I mean, I mix us shivcha b'fanav. He's taken over this organization and done absolutely incredible work and helped us take what we started to do at Cedar Sinai and take it to a whole new level. We decided let's create an advanced directive that's two-part, meaning part one is basically like that RCA in a good form, although it adds the option of organ donation, and it's worded in a format that does not poskin on brain death. So it's avoiding the issue. It's just appointing your rabbi, and your rabbi can decide. And by the way, when we appoint rabbi was appointed without pronouns. So it's not like it doesn't say he. It's we want this to be accessible for anyone. So so that's part one. Part one is the advanced directive, and that's the legal part. And Rabbi Brody's going to take us through that right now. Then we added to that a separate conversation guide that's not the legal document, but that then is questions that we feel in our work with people who are at the end of life are dealing with. What are those questions they should be thinking about just to help us understand your general goals, values, and preferences? This document, and now I'll turn it over to Rabbi Brody. This document, we worked very, very, very hard on it, and we worked with doctors, lawyers, social workers, rabbis. We got it approved by Rav Herschel Schechter and Rav Mordechai Willig, and we're happy to report that it is now also the official advanced directive of the RCA. So that you see the trajectory of the form. And there's an RCA version and a more general version, and there's versions in all in different locations throughout the world actually. And now Rabbi Brody, I'll turn it over to you to start walking us through it. And I can share my screen if you want. I have it up, or you can share your screen.
I'll start with my screen, and then we'll go to you. You'll start your screen. So thank you so much, Rabbi Weiner, for that great introduction and the history. It's been wonderful working with Rabbi Weiner on this project. And I just want to say is that what I always tell people, we do these workshops all over the world. People feel so relieved when they finish these forms. And the reason is that everyone knows they need to do this. Like conceptually, you get it. It's just hard to do it sometimes. And so what we try to do is make this accessible and user-friendly forms. You can find these forms on our website. I'll just briefly show you that, where you can see this. You come to the Amitai website, you see here Healthcare Directive, or you see Advanced Healthcare Directive. You take the initiative today, and you'll have an option. I don't know where all of you are coming from, but we have options now for, we have US, Ontario, Quebec, UK, and Israel. About to have British Columbia as well. And Thank God it's being used in different forms in different countries. You have to be sensitive to where you are in the world, of course, because you want to make sure you have a legally binding form. If you fill out the Ontario form in America, it ain't going to help you so much. Now, one of the things that we really worked hard to do on is to create, at least for the United States, a multi-state document. The Gouda, for example, which is a different model, it has a model which every state has a different form. And there are advantages to that. We didn't think that was necessary. We followed the model of the American Bar Association, and we created a multi-state model, which helps ensure that, if you download this in New York, but you send it to your parents in Houston or in LA or in Ohio, wherever it might be, that's going to work for them, right? Because otherwise that can lead to a lot of confusion we're nervous about. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of this document. Of course, there's instructions online, there's a video, there's instructions on the form as well. But since we're walking this through together, I don't think that we need to read the instructions. I do want to note that one of the things we tried to do is make this like a graphic, graphically aesthetically pleasing document. Meaning, I think that everyone actually will agree that on this respect, we have a big advantage of a lot of the models that are out there. And you see that in general society, there's been a lot of effort to make these easier to fill documents. If you go online also, it's a fillable PDF. So you can actually just type it in as well. You do need to print it to sign it. This is a legal document. It is true that there are some efforts, particularly over COVID, that allow for digital signatures. There's been a lot of pullback on that. And so we decided that we should take the model that even if you fill it in the PDF online, you still need to print it and sign it. Okay, so I'm going to walk through right now. And obviously, if you're looking here in dark green on the header, you'll see why when Rabbi Weiner gets to the conversation guide, we're going to switch to light green. And then the dark green here, the healthcare proxy and directive. Of course, you have to fill out your information, basic details. And here's the first statement. I designate the following person to act on my behalf. If at any time I am not able to make or communicate healthcare decisions for myself. Okay? The default in most states and proxies in general is that these documents kick in when you can't speak on your own behalf. There are some states, a limited number of states, that have models in which you can make this kick in at an earlier time. But we wanted to make a multi-state model, and we think also people feel most comfortable signing this document saying that I only want to empower someone with this power when I can't make or communicate healthcare decisions for myself. Now, you'll note we have a main proxy and alternates. There are different models out there. There are certainly some in some countries as well who have it as a model where you can select multiple proxies as the primary proxies or powers of attorney or representatives. And then they have different arrangements. Sometimes they all have to make agreements together jointly. Sometimes they can all have independent powers jointly and severally. Right? They're different models. And we follow the advice of many healthcare professionals and social workers and others who feel that the best model is the buck's got to stop at one person, meaning someone's got to take responsibility. And that's the most efficient, and not only efficient, but also effective way of creating clarity. Who should speak on your behalf? Now, that doesn't mean, of course, if I pick, kid A or my niece or whatever it might be, that other family members, loved ones won't be in the room, won't be there for someone, right? Have decisions input, right? Of course, that's possible and certainly can be encouraged in many cases, but we felt very strongly that the best model, the most effective model is to pick one person. Who should that person be? So as we explained, they have to be over 18 years or older. They need to be available or will make themselves available. This is, by the way, I'm talking to a group of rabbis. One of the reasons why we tell people, unless you don't have anyone in your life, you shouldn't appoint your rabbi. Because rabbis have funerals and they have brises and they have other simchas and occasionally even have their own family events. And they're not always available to be in the hospital. And someone who's going to be your power of attorney or proxy has got to be someone who's available. We also think it's to be someone who should assert themselves to express your wishes and advocate for your needs, meaning they're able to step up that way, and that they're trustworthy to honor your values and act in accordance with your preferences to the best of their ability. This is so important because one of the things a lot of people ask us all the time is, who should I appoint? They start going through different kids or siblings, whatever it might be. And one of the key factors is someone who's going to speak on your behalf for your values, right? Depending on what they think you would want. In America, we call this substituted judgment. It's true in some countries, they have different standards. They have what's known as best interest. In America, the default, though, is substituted judgment, in which the person, the proxy, is supposed to try to choose what they think the patient would want for themselves. Okay, so that's a very, very important piece to stress for yourselves and for others when thinking about this. Who do you got in your life? Right? It could be kids, not always, by the way. It could be a spouse. Spouses sometimes, depending on the age of when you're signing this, make sense or doesn't make sense. When I'm 46, so I just filled out one of these recently, the Israeli version, and I named my wife. Okay, it made a lot of sense to me. But I'm talking to people in like their 80s, might not make as much sense. And depends on the family dynamic and who else you got and where they're sort of at in life. So I just had a call yesterday from someone who had originally put down their son who's 24. And then they told me this guy, he's just not responsible. He can't deliver. So I'm putting my best friend down instead. So one of the things that I said to her is it's very important that now when you fill out this form, decide, you should tell the people who you think are going to be around who you've decided to pick. Now, sometimes that can be uncomfortable. And one of the things you can say to people, of course, is that doesn't mean I'm looking at names here. If I've got Isaac, Avi, Leah, and Drew, and I decide to have Leah as my power of attorney proxy, there you go, Leah. Right, look at that. Right, look at that empowerment. Oh, Leah's excited. Wait, you're going to see Leah. You might not be so excited as you go along because it's a big responsibility. Right, but it doesn't mean that Isaac and Avi and Drew shouldn't be involved in the conversation. But if you show up in the hospital and someone pulls this out and they say Leah's making the decision, and Drew's like, wait, why is she making the decisions? Why did mom point that? We've had a number of cases where that wasn't clarified, and it led to a lot of strife in the family, right? So you didn't really solve the problem that you're trying to solve here. So it's important to talk this out, think through who you've got in your life, who you want to be number one, and to have alternates. It's very important to have alternates because so often we have situations where, it's Yeshiva week and they're in Panama or Peru, or occasionally people even come to Israel, right? So, or Florida, right? So, it's one of those situations where it's important to have an alternate be available. Okay, so that's sort of the first page here. And as you can see, this is a pretty simple document. Here comes the directive, really the legal part of it, because our motto, at least of this document, is much more focused on empowering the power of attorney, the proxy, and to have the rights, including, let's say, in America under HIPAA laws, and of course in Ontario and Quebec, it's under different laws, right? But to have access to all your information, to be able to make decisions about hospital and hospice and nursing home. And we try to give people a little bit of teeth in this document, meaning we try to say that they're the ones who should make the decisions. They're the ones I trust the most. If for whatever reason a court gets involved and wants to appoint a medical conservator or guardian, I want this person to be appointed. The vast majority of times it doesn't come legal, right? These types of issues. The hospitals just want clarity. But we want to try to give a little bit of teeth to this. And so we made that part of this document as well. But the key part that really makes it Jewish in any respect is the top part in the bottom paragraph, in which we say, my proxy has full authority to make decisions for me about my healthcare, including end-of-life care, if I'm not able to make or communicate healthcare decisions for myself. This includes my desire, which I hereby direct my proxy, that all decision-making about healthcare should be done in accordance with Jewish law and custom. Okay? Now, this is important because you are revealing to your healthcare providers, okay, think about it. Hospitals deal with so many ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, whatever it might be. And you're giving them a gift of knowing, this person cares about Jewish law and custom. Right? They're not just Jewish, or they care about Judaism in this manner. That's significant to them. Of course, one of the questions comes is, well, what exactly does that mean? So, for example, if you look at the Aguda form, which again is a fine form, it's a fine model. So there it says that I want decisions made under strict Orthodox Jewish law and custom with permission of my rabbi. And we didn't take that model for a couple of reasons. Reason number one is not exactly always clear what strict Orthodox Jewish law and custom is. Doesn't really necessarily help per se by saying that. But also, we didn't want to create an ambiguity of who is serving as the power of attorney. One of the things that we were advised by a number of lawyers, actually in 4 different countries, is that some of the existing documents create ambiguities. Is the power of attorney, the proxy, the family member supposed to make decisions, the rabbi, or something called Orthodox Jewish law and custom? And so we wanted to make this a strong document that couldn't be challenged in that way. But of course, it's very important for people that if they don't know what Judaism has to say about this, and of course there's a lot of misconceptions and myths about these issues, that they should appoint who they'd want consulted. If they themselves were around, they would consult with this person. This is super duper important because, as you know, as rabbis, if you don't clarify and do a selech harav and decide who it's going to be, what ends up happening is different family members call their rabbi, and you call 4 rabbis, and you get 5 different opinions, at least, right? And so it's very important. Also, I always tell people, many Jews have the variety pack of kids, right? So depending on your background, but like I was in Woodmere recently where I did this. So, Jews in Woodmere, they've got one kid who's learning in Lakewood. They've got one kid who's mono-Orthodox in Teaneck. They've got one kid who's sort of like nominally like affiliated in Manhattan, and a 4th who's made Aliyah. The variety pack, right? Or the ones that, and there are many, many different types of Jewish families. Actually, some of the most interesting cases we deal with are when you have family members, one's Orthodox, one's not, and, mixed, and different dynamics happens all the time. So it's very, very important for a person to say, like, if a question has to come up, if you have ethical advice, if you have halachic advice, however you want to put it, who would you want to turn to? Right? And that's your choice, not someone else's choice. So this is a very important part. And so that's why we tell people, as to the requirements of Jewish law and custom, I advise my proxy to consult with the following rabbi or religious institution. Who do you want? And we, of course, tell people to also put down an alternate. Why? Because sometimes the rabbi can't be reached. And so who's next on the list? Right? It's very, very important. It happens all the time. As you know, rabbis can't always be reached. So sometimes these decisions can wait, but sometimes they can't. Who do you got? Amatai also has a helpline, 24/7 helpline, the Robert M. Barron Medical Halacha helpline. And we tell people you can always put us down as their backup as well. We're 24/7 reachable, particularly helpful on Shabbos and 3-day Yom Tovs. As Rav Willig once said to me, 1/7 of all halachic shilas related to end-of-life care happen on Shabbat. So I said to him, how do you know that? So he said to me, because the Malach HaMavis works 24/7. So that's how it works. And the truth is, it's probably 1/10, because, hospitals are less busy on Shabbos and the weekends. But whatever, but you get the point. So we have that available, and it's very, very important. And the final part, which I'll just mention here, is this issue of organ donation for transplantation. Amatai grew out of what used to be known as the Halachic Organ Donor Society. And as Rabbi Weiner mentioned beforehand, this has been a matter of great dispute. And we were trying to get people to say something about this issue without getting into the weeds of that debate, that issue. And so part of the formulation which we have here is this section is relevant only if death as defined by Jewish law and custom has been determined by my proxy in consultation with my named rabbinic consultant. And then you can choose. Right? I authorize my proxy to prove, I do not wish, or I authorize my proxy to approve translation for only the following organs and tissues. One of the reasons why this also helps is, let's say you really want to be an organ donor, but for whatever reason have decided that I'd rather my proxy make the ultimate decision and not create an advanced legal directive, like on my license in DMV or Donate Life America. This is a very helpful way of doing it. The other ways why this is helpful is that, without getting to this right now, there's a lot of technology developing that's going to make possible organ donation even after a cardiac death, after the heart stops. Getting rid of this broader issue, and or at least partly getting rid of this issue. And so we want to create an option for people to select this here as well. Friends, that's the document. It's a simple document on a legal level. You, of course, have to sign it. You name, address, date, and then you have to have witnesses sign it. Now, to make this a multi-state document, we were machmer l'kol hadeos when it comes to the 50 great states of America, because what can I say? The 50 states, federalism has its advantages, has its disadvantages. One of the disadvantages is that all 50 states have different ideas about who should witness this. And you have to be, whatever it might be. So we took all the machmer shitot, all the machmer deos, and you can't have someone who's the proxy or financially responsible for your healthcare or a healthcare provider or anyone in your will. So, Isaac, if you want Drew to sign this for you, you're going to have to tell Drew that he's not in your will. And I hope that doesn't make any issues for you guys, but Leia's a little bit shocked, right? But that's how it works out. And you sign the document. You don't have to have it notarized, except for in 4 states of Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, and West Virginia. And that's your document. It's a very simple document to complete with regard to the sort of the basics. And then afterwards, we help guide people on our website where to store it. If you put it with your last will and testament, the financial will, it ain't going to be helpful. Right? That's too late. When they open that, this document is not going to help. So we discuss how to keep it accessible. You know where Jews keep these documents, by the way. This is unbelievable. Where do Jews keep these documents? In their freezer. I cannot tell you how many people tell me that they keep these documents in their freezer. I grew up in Texas. We keep ice in the freezer in Texas. But apparently this is a thing. But, I don't really recommend that. Rabbi Weiner knows what I'm talking about. It's pretty crazy. So this is the document. It's available. It's a pretty straightforward document to complete. You don't have to think a little bit who you want. And the obvious question is going to be, though, if you've appointed a power of attorney, a proxy, they're going to be asking, what they should be asking, besides which rabbi should I call, is, well, what do you want? What do you want? Now, you should know that not everyone believes in asking that question. There are opinions that what you want doesn't really matter. Like when I spoke to the young Israel of Woodmere a couple weeks ago, someone asked me an interesting question. Right after I gave the drush, it came beeline right to the bima and said to me, since when in halacha does what you want decide? Like, I don't decide by some personal preference how I warm up food on Shabbat. So why does this matter? And it's true, there are some poskim who don't feel this way, but the poskim that we work with feel very strongly that personal preference has an impact, that personal choice matters. And so what we try to do is create this conversation guide, which Rabbi Weiner is going to walk us through now, to give people the opportunity to give their general values and preferences. So Rabbi Weiner, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and you'll sort of go through
Sure.
that.
Do you want to just deal with Leia's question for you in the chat? If people leave money for a shul or institution, can it not be witnessed at a shul event? I'm not aware of any prohibition against that, but I don't know if you...
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's sort of like a shul donation type of thing. If you were leaving money for a shul institution will, can that be witnessed at shul? No, I think that's not a problem. I don't think it's an issue, but I'm happy to look that up later and see if that'd be an issue. Thank you. If people leave money in Matai, that's the real question, right? Because that's a problem, but we haven't had that issue yet. So, okay, Rabbi, go ahead.
So, so now you see, I mean, that document, even the 20 minutes that we just spent talking about it, you could fill it out much faster. It's a very simple document. It's just appointing the proxy rabbi and making a decision about organ donation. And the idea is that it should be simple. We want people to fill them out. Now, what we have is, what we'll go through is what could both be useful for your proxy, for your rabbi, for helping them know who you are, and in general, and as it sounds like maybe Rav Shmuley used it as well. As a chaplain, one of the common calls I get, and I'm sure you all get similar concerns, is my so and so just got diagnosed with such and such. What should we be thinking about? What should we be asking? Just these very broad questions, like, I don't even know what to do next. I've never encountered something like this. What should I be thinking? What should we be talking about? So what we're about to do is, there are some questions that come up when people are either aging or dealing with severe illness, and we we do not want to ask the specific question, do I want a feeding tube? Do I not want a feeding tube? Do I want a trach? Do I not want a trach? That is stuff we don't know what specific questions are going to arise. Instead, we want to help people articulate their general values, their goals, their preferences, to get a picture of who they are. And then that will help us and guide us in making these decisions. If they have very specific decisions, preferences, you'll see we have space to articulate them. But this what we call this conversation guide, the goal of it is now a separate document. The goal of it is to help with to help articulate these values. And again, this is a separate document. This is not a legally binding document. This is not handed in to your hospital, to your healthcare provider, to your lawyer. This is just given to those people who will be making the decision. Your spiritual guide, your family, your proxy. That's who will get this. And the main thing, really, and I'm happy that Rav Shmuley did it this way, is the conversation, not the checking the boxes. It's having a conversation. So for the sake of time, we'll go through it quickly. Normally we do this slowly and let people fill them out, but I just want to give you a taste of the questions. So the first page is trying to help people articulate their general goals, values, preferences as relates to pain and risk tolerance, because this is how a lot of questions come up. And we have a variety of ways of answering them with Likert scales and then just yes or no questions. So for example, just to think to yourself, and maybe think to yourself as I read these questions about your own self. I value undergoing potentially painful treatments if they have the potential of prolonging my life, even if they will not cure my underlying illness and lead to significant discomfort. So I want life prolonged, even if it means suffering, right? So do I agree with that statement? I want my life prolonged, even not to save my life? Or do I say, no, 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 I strongly disagree? Or you might have mixed feelings. You might not have strong feelings. That's okay. You don't have to have strong feelings, but it helps you to think about these things and just share general reactions. Or a similar question. Number 2, I value undergoing potentially painful treatments to try prolonging my life toward the goal of participating in a specific occasion. This is what Shlomo was writing in the chat about before, like a family wedding, bar bat mitzvah, a birth, even if it will not cure my underlying illness and may lead to significant discomfort. This comes up a lot, right? The family's making a decision, but there's a wedding next week or there's a bris coming up. Should we try to keep them alive for that? And maybe we can zoom in, FaceTime them into the wedding and they'll be somewhat able to experience it somewhat, even if it means suffering. Are they the type of person that says, yeah, make me suffer if I could be alive for one more simcha? Or no, I don't want to suffer. So I strongly disagree. I would not want to suffer like that. Even if it means, what kind of life is that? I'm listening on a Zoom. I don't really know what's going on. So that's an important thing to think about, because if you have to make the decision for someone, it's nice to know what they thought about that. A similar issue, very common issue. It is my medical team's responsibility to try to balance pain relief with maintaining my alertness. When it's difficult to maintain both pain relief and alertness, do I have a preference? I would ask them to prioritize which. You might not have a preference, but do you prefer pain relief? Okay, it might mean I'm unconscious, but I don't care. I don't want to suffer. Or alertness. I'm fine with suffering. I'd rather be alert. I want to know what's going on in the world. I want to know, and be able to interact. Yes or no questions. I value undergoing a high-risk procedure that might shorten or jeopardize my life. It's risky, but if it could cure my illness, I would want to do it. Yes or no? These are the types of questions, by the way, Rabbi Brody was referring to. Many post-game, actually, their answer, when they are asked this question, their response is, what does the patient want? There could be some questions where it's a very low-risk procedure and has a high possibility of totally saving their life, where many post-game would say, you have to do it. But in general, the response of the post-game is, well, it depends on what they would want. Okay, let's make it a little bit more, add some more nuance to it. I value undergoing a high-risk procedure that might shorten my life or jeopardize my life if it could just stabilize my condition, but not cure my underlying illness. I want to have that surgery just to be stable, even though whatever terminal illness, God forbid, the one has, is not going to be cured by it. I would still want it, yes or no, despite the risk. Or, adding even more complication, I value undergoing a high-risk procedure that might shorten or jeopardize my life if it could possibly extend my life by any amount of time, even a few days or weeks, but not cure my underlying illness. Would you want to have a risky procedure just to get a few days extra of life? Some people would want that, some people would not. Do these questions make you feel like, you know what, there's another issue though that I want to talk about, that this makes me think about, that's not asked here. So you have an opportunity or a person has an opportunity to write their own comments. They might not even answer any of these questions, but the comments might be very valuable. Next section, and I see there's a question. I'll look at it in a second. Next issue is about how you make decisions. As a patient, I generally prefer knowing. This comes up a lot. As little as possible about my condition and treatment, only a general summary information about my condition and treatment, or all the details. I want to give it to me straight, right? Give me all the details. This comes up a lot. I always remember when I do this, the case we had where I walked into a patient's room. They've told me it was a serious illness, but when I came to the room, there was a sign on the door that said, patient does not know her diagnosis. Do not tell her. That's what it said on the door, on the sign on the door. I walk in the room, and the patient says to her family who's around the bedside, could you please step out so I can talk to the rabbi? The family steps out. I sit down at the bedside. I wasn't going to say anything because I read the sign on the door. The patient says, Rabbi, my family doesn't know how bad my condition is. Please don't tell them. They won't be able to handle it. I'm like, they're lying to her. She's lying to them. It's, so anyways, these are issues that come up. Similarly, number 2, if I have a terminal illness, I prefer either not knowing how quickly it is progressing, right? I don't want to be scared by that information. Number 2, only having a general sense of my prognosis Or number 3, no, I want to know the best detailed estimation of how long I have to live. This type of stuff comes up. You can imagine someone's in a surgery or procedure or imaging, and they find something, but they're not alert. And the surgeon or the technician comes out to the family who's in the waiting room, anxious, and they say, okay, the surgery went well, but we found X or Y. This is what's going on. And now they have to discuss as a family. This comes up. How are we going to tell them? What should we tell them? And imagine having already had that conversation. What a blessing that is. Number 3, if I'm deemed terminally ill, I would prefer treatments focus on comfort and managing my symptoms. This is similar to what we discussed on the previous page, but just worded slightly differently. Treatments focus on comfort and managing symptoms while also being open to potentially painful treatments or procedures that might extend my life, or just treatments focus on extending my life without prioritizing my comfort. Similar question to the previous page, just another way of asking it. And finally, if I have an irreversible lack of cognition, as in cases of advanced dementia or severe brain injury, I would prefer, and by the way, this is a great form to think about when someone's first diagnosed with early onset dementia before they lose their cognition, but they realize it's coming. Let me share my values now. So if you had this lack of cognition, you can't interact. What would you want? Treatments focused only on comfort and managing symptoms, such as pain management. Treatments focus on comfort and managing my symptoms, while also being open to potentially painful treatments or procedures if they could extend my life. Or 3, treatments focus primarily on extending my life without prioritizing my comfort. And then again, did anything else come up for you in that conversation? And then finally, in the last few questions to get you thinking, what do you worry about when it comes to physical and social independence? Imagine a family has to make decisions for their loved one. Am I going to put them in a facility? Am I going to put them in a home of a loved one? Whose home? Are they going to try to keep them in their own home? So what do you worry about? And your family needs to know this. I worry about needing someone to help me with my basic daily activities, eating, bathing, getting dressed. Do you disagree? No, I'm not worried about if I need help with that, someone to help me. Or do you strongly agree? Yes, I do not want to have help with that. Or feeling that I'm an excessive burden on others. Sometimes people tell me, no, I raised my children and they were a burden on me for 18 years or longer, and now I can be a burden on them for a couple of years. Like that's their job. So you say, no, I'm not so worried about that. Or you say, yes, that's a big concern of mine. This comes up when families are like trying to balance it. Are they a burden or not? And how much would they not want to be a burden? Or being alone and feeling lonely. This has a big ramification in decisions, right? Some people are loners. Some people are, that's just their, I didn't mean loners. I meant like they're introverts, right? They want it. They're fine with being alone. They're okay with that. Some people, no, I would be terrified to be alone, lonely, neglected. So, do you agree that you worry about being lonely? Or no, I don't agree with that. This also, you can see how that could be very relevant. And finally, if it became difficult for me to live in my home, what would you value? This is big decisions. Being cared for in the home of a family member? No, I disagree. I wouldn't value that. Or yes, I strongly agree. I want to be in a home of a family member. Being cared for in a nursing home or long-term care facility, you might say, yes, I agree. They have the resources, they have the staff, they have the, or no, I disagree. That's not a type of place I'd want to live. Or remaining in my own home, even if it meant limitations in the amount of skilled medical care I could receive. This could be very relevant. And then there's other questions that could come up. And like Shlomo pointed out in the comments before, there could be a lot of discussion here that it could be dependent on a lot of different nuances. And so please, people, write that in the comments. And finally, we wanted to give even more space for people to write comments. And we put a little paragraph here to help people think. This is in general, if you have further thoughts, maybe it's elaborating on preferences from before or specific guidelines or concerns about end-of-life care, invasive procedures, pain management, organ donation. Specifically, we asked to consider this paragraph. You may use this space to express your preferences about where and with whom you'd want to be at the end of your life, or to describe in your own words what would be a good death or a bad death for you. You may find it helpful to invoke memories of dying process of death of loved ones and discuss what you found meaningful or disturbing about the experience. For example, I hated how Uncle David suffered from so many painful procedures, or I admired my friend Sarah for fighting till the end. Or it meant a lot that my mother died in her home, surrounded by her family. You might even say things like, who I want to speak at my funeral, or where I want my funeral, or this song played, whatever that might be. You might want to finish this sentence. What matters to me at the end of life is. And everyone's different, so whatever that might be for you. And someone might not have anything there, but it's an important question to ask. I think that's the most important question of them all. What matters to me at the end of life is. And again, this document, that's the end of it. This document is separate. This is meant for you to have a conversation. It's meant for you to share with your proxy, with your rabbis, to help people know each other, and know how to make the right decision for people. It's obviously not perfect, right? There's going to be decisions that are hard decisions. And you might read this document and say, I'm still not totally sure. But these documents are by nature imperfect because we can't predict the future. We can't know for certain. But in our experience, we find that they give us the best job of painting a picture of who that person is to help to be able to apply that to various different scenarios, and hopefully to help people, to reduce the burden, the stress, the grief after the fact, and to ensure that people's values, ultimately, the main thing is to ensure people's values are respected, that their own person, that what they would want is what we respect. As Rabbi Brody pointed out at the beginning, the goal of all these documents is not to choose what I think is in their best interest. It's always to choose what they would say for themselves if they could choose right now. Our job is to represent what would they choose. As a rabbi, fine, we have an additional job to say, and how does Jewish values guide these decisions in consultation with their values and goals and preferences. So that's the document, the two documents, and we would love to hear feedback, reactions, critique, ideas. Rabbi Brody.
Rabbi, there's a question here. If the person is alert, why would the proxy be making the decision?
Well, these are typically in scenarios where people have limited alertness. So we're trying to get them to have somewhat, some sense of alertness, but they're not in the decision-making capacity moment. If they have total capacity and you can have a conversation with them and they can make a decision, they can tell you yes or no, I want this, I don't want this, then that's great, and you don't need the document. But sometimes, first of all, the document's trying to help us get them to the point of alertness, and we're trying to help them get there, or they're in a state where they're just not totally alert and they're not alert enough to actually make decisions.
I also found that, I'll take a question one moment, but I've also found that it just opens the door for conversation so people start thinking about this a little bit. So even if you couldn't speak for yourself, but you've thought about this before, you've talked about it, it's a lot more comfortable speaking with a loved one when you've talked about it calmly. I compare it to the conversation we have with our kids about the birds and the bees. I mean, no one really wants to have that conversation, or at least I didn't. But it's a lot better to have that conversation in a calm way than it is when you walk in your kid and you find them doing X, Y, or Z. I think the same thing is true in these scenarios. You've talked about this a little bit. It's opened the door for conversations, and of course, it can be updated. The reason why the conversation guide is not a legal document is it's meant to reflect general personal preferences and values. And so, if you're able to change your mind, or as you go along your healthcare journey, you have the conversation again, you rip up this document and sign it anew. There's a question. Go ahead, Leah. Robin, Leah, sorry.
No worries. First of all, thank you so much. This is like a tremendous tool and resource, and all the work that both of you are doing is amazing. I'm so grateful. I'm just thinking from like the perspective of my Kayla, most people have young kids. There's something about this that reads very like, oh, if I'm in my 30s, I'm doing this with my parents, preparing myself to be their proxy. But I would love for my congregants to think about it for themselves. Also, like everyone is one car crash away from these questions. And one thing that I noticed that wasn't in here is any conversation about like responsibilities, like vis-a-vis your children. Like part of me says, like, if I was filling out this form, the way I would fill it out like now in the next 10 years is different than how I would fill it out once my kids are 18 or older or financially independent. And I'm just wondering like whether you've presented to like that niche like age group, like parents of kids, younger-ish kids, and how you sort of like angled it at them and encouraged them maybe to like use that paragraph space to like think through those types of issues with their partners.
I'll start and say that's a great point. I mean, we try to encourage people when we do workshops to make this multi-generational and get people at different ages. I'm always thrilled when we have people like in their 30s or 40s come and they realize like I should really create some clarity here. We've had some really sad cases recently of people dying in their 40s, someone who choked suddenly on a piece of steak, whatever it might be, and that's it, right? It's a car crash, it's a terrorist attack, it's a piece of steak away, right? So it is very important to have this, make this clear. Frankly, when there's people that we work with sometimes say when you're over the age of 18, you should do this. And let's say you're a 19-year-old and your parents are divorced and they don't necessarily get along so great. It happens, right? and something, God forbid, happens, who's speaking on your behalf? How's that going to work out? Right. So all sorts of scenarios in which you could think about this. I think it's super important. And of course, as you get older, you might change who your proxy will be. I think about it now, I have underage kids, whatever it is. So I have my brother and my wife, whatever it might be. But, as they get older, that will probably change. And then you have to do the document again. The advantage of this document is that it's very easy to do, right? It's the type of thing, you collect the old ones, you rip them up, and you just draw it up again.
I would just add, and first of all, I've heard rabbis say actually 16, the age of you get your driver's license is the age people should do this. Only thing I would add, I mean, you bring up a really good point is, that, and that's part of what the fill-in space is for. But, Rabbi Brody and I have been doing this a lot with synagogues as a program, as an event at the synagogue. And I mean, we're happy to do it in any synagogue, but I even encourage you and yours, like, this is a great program to do with your kehillah on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night or something. And if you do it and you have some ideas or suggestions, like questions that could be asked or, ways of formulating things, we'd love to hear that feedback or those ideas. If there's specific, things that weren't considered based on the demographic we were thinking about and that we should include, that would be, great to hear.
Yeah. Rabbi Chessy's in Sharon, Massachusetts, Noah Chessy's, has been calling up members one by one and inviting them to come to his office and make sure they have this done and do a conversation guide with him. And it's a great bonding experience, right? It's a really great bonding experience. So it's really a tool that you can utilize to open up those conversations. I saw there's a question here about, people who travel. I mean, this happens a lot. We get this a lot. If you're in different countries, so if you're visiting Israel for a week or two, you're not going to fill this out for the Israeli version. If you're the type of person that splits time regularly between two different countries, like I was just in Florida, and they're like half the people there were like Canadians who spend the winter in Florida and summers in Canada. So then I would create 2 documents that work for each country. I mean, in theory, most hospitals just want to get some clarity. If you brought them a Canadian version, they might say, okay, we'll take this, but they're not obligated to do so by any means. So that's our general recommendation. Of course, if you have a complex dynamic in different places, and then you would certainly see an estate attorney, to make sure you have the proper documents for each place.
Yeah, Avi, I see your question is a good question. It is a common issue that the V said voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. We used to counter it a lot here before medical aid and dying became legal in California. That was a way that people would help themselves to die at the end of life when they were suffering and they were terminal without doing it in a direct way. It became less common here once it became legal for the doctor for them to prescribe something. We still get it. In fact, just this week I had someone who actually did this, and they're it's obviously very complicated halachically. In some ways, it's less problematic than medical aid and dying because it's passive. Medical aid and dying in California, in America, includes the patient taking a medication, or I don't know if you call it medication, but taking a drug that ends their life within minutes to hours. In Canada, it's a technician or providing it for them, and it's problematic halachically. The process of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is where someone basically gets high doses of pain medication and then doesn't take in any nutrition or hydration, and obviously that will end their life. But it's more passive because they're not actually actively killing themselves. So that is something that people do, and that obviously is, even though it's there are halachic concerns with it, it's less bad than other choices. And oftentimes with medical ethics, we're choosing the least bad choice because there's no good option when someone's suffering and they're having a prolonging terminal illness and they're in pain, and we don't really have a good solution for them. So it's like sometimes we do have to figure out, well, what's the least bad solution to help honor them and support them.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, I was wondering, in Israel, I think a lot of people don't think about what having IV fluids, that they think, oh, for sure, like we just have to keep giving IV fluids. It's just part of halacha, but that can really prolong the dying process as opposed to prolong the living process. And I wasn't sure if you know in Israel or what you encountered at Cedar Sinai around people wrestling with that question.
The dynamic in Israel is a little bit complicated because the law here in Israel is actually built around halacha. It's the only actually halachic law in this country. I mean, people talk about marriage, divorce, kashrut. That's baloney, meaning everyone gets around it one way or another. But as it comes to end of life care, it's actually built based on more or less the positions of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And you can't, legally at least, stop providing hydration in Israel unless it's medically contraindicated. So it's a different ball game. We don't get into the weeds right now of all this, but one of the reasons why we formulate different things in our different countries, UK, Israel, America, Ontario, is depending on the scenarios, what's going on in the country and the various case laws, what the options are. Canada right now is euthanasia. 5% of all deaths in Canada come from euthanasia right now. It's 15,000 people a year. I just want to repeat that. 15,000 people a year right now die through euthanasia in Canada. That's really transforming the whole notion of end-of-life care and aging in Canada. I don't think in good ways, but that's a longer conversation. And, so it's important to be sort of sensitive on some of those issues. But, when it comes to the specifics, we do case by case, right? In other words, hydration is certainly one of those things that many poskim think is something you got to always be providing. But there are different ways of providing hydration, different amounts. There's ice chips, right? There are different techniques that sometimes are appropriate in different circumstances. So one other thing, I'll just go ahead.
That figure you just quoted from Canada. So is that based on patients making that choice for themselves, or is that based on the system saying this person is
patient?
Okay.
But sometimes they're being strongly encouraged. But it's a much longer conversation.
Yeah.
But it's Sarna.
I have two other questions. Sorry, I have like infinity questions, but are there, in addition to the books that the two of you have written, are there books that you think every like community posek poseket should like have on their shelves as reference, other than like Encyclopedia Chatit Rafui, whatever order those are meant to be in? And I have Jason's books on this stuff also, but like does Ematai have like, here's what everyone needs on their bookshelves?
So we're working on a book series actually right now. So that'll be announced hopefully coming up soon. Rabbi Weiner and I both writing different books on this. Rabbi Weiner's book is the best book on this topic in terms of, just so you should know. The other essential book, what's really much more encyclopedic in my mind, is Rabbi Dr. Avram Steinberg's book. And the newer version is called Refuah Kalacha, 6 volumes. Okay, Refuah Kalacha, which I think they're working on the translation for actually, is very, very important. And that would be like the book.
But it's better to have the online access, right? Because then it's up to date, or you think buy it?
Full Kalacha is pretty up to date, in terms of these issues. But on our website, in different areas, we give like videos and we have small articles on the side. I highly recommend people to read the article by Rabbi Dr. Judah Goldberg. It came out in Tradition a few years ago. That was very, very important. It's on our website, and it has an appendix from Rabbi Schechter and Rabbi Willig. Some very, very important ideas in there. I think it's important. Rabbi Weiner, you want to add?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, anything by Rabbi Steinberg is valuable for community leaders. You're going to have all the information there.
Yeah. He's just very trustworthy, Rabbi Steinberg, and how he presents things. I mean, he has his own opinions, but he's super loyal to like presenting the positions as they were given to him. He has a lot of balanced, and sort of giving different people different shakes on different issues, and even ones that he doesn't agree on. I mean, he has some strong opinions himself personally. I speak to him a lot, but when you look in his books, he presents the different positions. I mean, he gives people fair shakes. Very, very important. One of the things that we see, and I've really been trying encouraging this a lot when we do these workshops, is it's not a big secret that not everyone asks shilas at the end of life, their family members. Why? Well, partly that's because they're afraid of the answer they're going to be given. And I see this in very firm communities. I see it in less, whatever it might be. And one of the things we're trying to promote to people is that no, like we actually have a balanced view of these issues. We're balancing values. We're not trying to cause anyone to suffer. We're not trying to prolong a painful dying process. At least that's the way Amatai looks at it. As opposed to that we work with, when I talk to Rabbi Weiner, when we try to figure these issues out. And I think when people hear that, they're like, oh, okay, because this would actually be helpful to have a really big source of wisdom in these types of issues. And so that's one of the things I would just encourage you as rabbis, like encourage your members, your balabatim, whatever you want to call it, that they should know, like, no one's trying to cause you to suffer. And we want to help you walk through this. And the alternative of just making decisions on your own and going on your own is you live with a lot of guilt with these things. So it's very beneficial to people. And I think that's like people comforted to know they've talked to others. I mean, Sonia, you had another question? I'm sorry, was there a second
I
question?
did. No, that was fantastic. I have it in my head like a dream program where we just do like all the Jewish forms. So it's like medical proxy, post-nops if people didn't do pre-nops, halachic wills. Is there anything that's like missing on that triumvirate list?
I mean, yeah, it's not. We've been thinking about how to make this like user friendly type of things, like just get it all done with. But
Yeah.
the form we have right now, if you know what you want to write, you can do it quickly. But some people need to think about this, right? There's choices that have to be made here. The post-op or the pre-op is sort of you're just being handed the form in terms of that. Same thing with that. So I think there are a lot of other questions. By the way, if you have members of your show that are 30s and 40s, you should be making sure everyone has life insurance. When I was invited to community last year, the rabbi said to me, we want you to speak about the importance of buying life insurance on Shabbat afternoon. I said to them, that's a really boring shiur. You're ruining the scholar residence. Right? You should buy life insurance. So he said to me, in my community, in the past year or two, we've had 5 breadwinners who died suddenly in like their 40s, early 50s, whoever it was, without life insurance. And the community now has a 7-digit budget line of dealing with those tuitions and camp or whatever it might be. So you're going to speak about the importance of buying life insurance. So in the end, we turned into something broader. And, I spoke about life insurance and healthcare proxies and wills and whatever it might be, as I broadened it out. And we call it a plan what you can session. Right? But plan what you can, right? You can't plan everything we're going to go in life, healthcare, whatever it might be. But what you can plan is to create some sort of protections for people. It's very important. Very, very important. All right. So
I hope this is all helpful. And, I know that I can speak on behalf of Brody as well, that we're happy to be in touch and help in any way that we can. And Amatai is doing really great work in their hotline. I mean, it's a great resource that's now, making a big difference.
So thank you guys, everyone. And thank you, Rav Shmuley. And again, if you want to look at the website, you can always reach us. We have a helpline here. We have a lot of stuff going on that people utilize in a lot of different ways. We also have a new prayers project where people can find different tefillot. We have English and Hebrew, and we explain like the different tehillim and why we say this, and we have a little bit of an explanation why this is meaningful in these contexts. So there's a lot going on here that we hope will be helpful to people.
Thank you so much.
Wish everyone arichas yamim v'shanim.
Yamim v'shanim, yeah.
Thank you.
We gotta make that a project, the Yamim v'shanim project.
Thank you guys so much. And to all the audience, if you want to share this video or recording, it will be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So feel free to watch it again, check it out, share it. It's all available. Well, Rabbi Weiner, Rabbi Brody, thank you guys so much for joining us, teaching the community. And we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you.
Take care.